In 1987, a builder in Coventry ripped out 17 cast-iron fireplace surrounds in a single terrace row and skip-binned the lot. I know because I was there, and I was 16, and I didn't have a van. Those surrounds are fetching £300 to £400 apiece now, and the houses that replaced them with wood chip and storage heaters look older than the fireplaces ever did. That's the thing about British homes. The ones built before the war weren't just built to look a certain way, they were built to work. And when we spent the 50s through to the 80s pulling them apart and calling it improvement, we weren't just changing the look. We were removing systems, passive systems mostly, that used the building's own mass and layout and orientation to do jobs we now run electricity to replicate. We thought we were modernizing. What we actually did, in a lot of cases, was downgrade. I want to go through 10 features that got pulled out or plastered over or laughed out of the room and explain what they were actually doing, because most of them were doing something rather clever, and the people who ripped them out didn't know that, and neither did the people who let them. Let's start with the one that comes up in every terrace clearance I've ever done. The larder, not a walk-in wardrobe for food. An actual larder. North-facing wall, no heating, tile or stone floor, usually a ventilated gap to the outside through a small screened opening. Pre-war builders put them in as standard in working terraces across the Midlands and the North, and they worked on a principle so simple it barely needs explaining. Cold air sinks, north walls stay cool, and stone or tile holds a low temperature even when the kitchen warms up from cooking. A proper larder held food at roughly the same temperature as a modern fridge in the cooler months, which in Britain is most of the year, let's be honest, and it did it without a compressor, without a thermostat, and without a bill. In summer it was less effective, yes, but you didn't store the same things in summer. People knew what to store and when, because they cooked around the seasons rather than against them. The fitted kitchen killed the larder, not because the larder failed, but because the fitted kitchen's selling point was seamless units from wall to wall, and a larder alcove breaks that seamless run. So it got boarded over, or converted into a cupboard with chipboard shelves and a light that buzzes, and suddenly you've got a room temperature box where a cold room used to be, and you're wondering why your cheese goes off by Thursday. I've done clearances where the larder shelves were still in place, original glazed pottery on them, tins of Coleman's from the 60s still sealed. The chill in those rooms on a November morning is remarkable. You open the door, and it hits you. The building is still doing what it was built to do, 60 years after anyone thought to thank it for it. The one thing I'd say to anyone who suspects they might have a larder bricked up or boarded, and in Edwardian and interwar terraces, that's more common than you'd think, is check the north-facing ground floor wall. If there's a section that sounds different when you knock it, or if there's a ventilation grill at low level that doesn't seem to correspond to anything visible inside, it's worth investigating. A working larder, reinstated, is not a novelty. It is a cold room that costs nothing to run. The Chimney Breast. Now this one has been pulled out in vast numbers since the 70s, because it takes up floor space. It sits in the middle of walls where people want to hang televisions, and the conventional wisdom was that a flat wall is more useful than a big brick lump sticking into your living room. Except that big brick lump was doing something. It's called thermal mass, and it matters. Brickwork absorbs heat. If you run a fire in a chimney breast through a winter afternoon, the brickwork soaks that heat up slowly, and then it releases it slowly through the evening and into the night. It doesn't cool down at the same rate the air does. That's why an older house with its chimney breast intact feels warm at 10 o'clock at night even if you haven't had the fire on since 6. The room isn't warm because of the fire. It's warm because of the wall. A storage heater tries to replicate this. Cheap overnight electricity heats a core of clay bricks, which release warmth through the day. It's the same principle. But a chimney breast of any size has considerably more thermal mass than a storage heater. It doesn't require a cheap overnight tariff to function, and it doesn't cost £400 to install. It was already there. When builders removed chimney breasts in the 70s and 80s, they replaced them with a flat plasterboarded wall that has essentially no thermal mass at all. You heat the air in the room, the air cools, and you heat it again. The building contributes nothing. You're paying to heat air rather than to warm a building, and the difference in your bills is not trivial. Now, something worth knowing. When a chimney breast was removed but the builders left the flue stack above the ceiling line, what sometimes got left behind is the original cast iron register grate still sitting in the opening, just behind the plasterboard. I've seen this more times than I can count. The breast comes out, someone plasters over the opening, and they leave the grate in there. Those register grates, and I'll come to them in a moment, are worth money. But more than that, in some of those cases, the opening is still there and the flue is still partially functional. A surveyor with a camera can tell you quickly. And if it is, you have options that are considerably cheaper than you might expect. The register grate and the air brick, I want to pair these two because they're part of the same system, and that system is one of the things we've most completely broken by modernizing without understanding. A register grate is the cast iron plate and frame assembly that sits in the fireplace opening and controls how much air goes up the flue. You open it to draw the fire. You close it when the fire's out to stop the warm air in the room going straight up the chimney. Simple, adjustable, manual ventilation control. You set it by feel and by knowing your fire. They were made in enormous numbers from the mid-19th century right through to the 30s. In every size, from kitchen range openings to small bedroom hearths. And the better ones, Falkirk Foundry, Carron, a few Midlands makers, are genuinely attractive objects, well made, with good detail work. At the same time, under the floors of those same houses, the builders were putting in air bricks. A terrace built before 1920 almost certainly has them. Small perforated clay or iron bricks set into the outside wall at low level, designed to ventilate the underfloor void and stop timber joists rotting from damp. The floorboards breathe from below. The joist ends stay dry. The floor lasts 120 years and is still doing its job. Now, what happened when people modernized? They filled the fireplace with a gas fire and blocked the register grate. Or they took the grate out entirely and plastered the opening, and they painted the air bricks over, or they built a raised patio that sat above them, or they ran pipe insulation across them in a failed effort to stop drafts, and suddenly the house that was built to breathe stopped breathing. The result, in a lot of cases, is rising damp. Not because the building was poorly built, it wasn't. Because the ventilation system that the building depended on was removed, and the moisture that the air movement used to carry away from the floor void now has nowhere to go. It rises into the walls. It comes up through the floors. Someone calls a damp-proofing company, who sells them a chemical injection course and a tanking membrane, which is often unnecessary and sometimes makes the problem worse. I've been in houses where the damp-proofer's bill was £4,000 and the actual cause was 2 painted-over air bricks and a blocked fireplace opening. Clear the bricks, open the flue, and in a dry summer the damp retreats. It doesn't always work that simply, but it works that way more often than the industry would like you to know. If you have an older terrace, find your air bricks on the outside wall and check they're clear. That's not a restoration project. That's maintenance. If they're blocked, clear them. If they're missing, replace them. A clay air brick costs about £2 from a builder's merchant. A damp survey costs considerably more and often tells you to do the same thing, the scullery. This is one people look at blankly when I mention it, and then I explain it and they say, well, yes, obviously. The scullery was a separate room from the kitchen, smaller, colder, with a stone or tiled floor, a cold water tap, a large shallow sink, and usually a copper for boiling laundry. It was where you washed up, where you cleaned the boots, where wet coats were hung, where the mucky business of domestic life was physically separated from the room where food was prepared and eaten. 2 rooms doing 2 different things, because 2 different things were happening. The fitted kitchen swallowed it. In the drive toward open-plan, single-space living, the scullery became at best a utility room tacked onto the back, and at worst just part of the kitchen extended. And the consequence is that the kitchen now does everything. It's where the mucky boots come in, where the dog is fed, where the laundry pile sits, where the school bags land, and also where you're supposed to be making food on clean surfaces. It doesn't really work. Anyone who has a family and a single kitchen knows it doesn't really work. The kitchen accumulates muck at a rate it can't be cleaned because it was never designed to be a scullery as well. Here's the part that makes pastry cooks and bread bakers quietly furious. The scullery's work surface was usually a cold stone slab. Marble, or more often in working-class homes, a thick piece of slate or even scrubbed Yorkshire stone. Cold, slightly absorbent of moisture, and absolutely ideal for working pastry because it stays cool even when the kitchen is warm from cooking. Pastry cooks will spend anywhere from £200 to over £1,000 installing a marble worktop section to replicate what a scullery slab provided as standard. The slab is still out there too. I've seen them come out of demolitions and sell for £50 to £120 at a salvage yard. Someone else paying for the privilege of what used to be included. The pantry cupboard and the cold slab. Not everyone had a full larder room, but a huge proportion of pre-war houses, including smaller terraces that weren't big enough for a dedicated larder, had a pantry cupboard, usually in an external wall, sometimes under the stairs on the north side, built in, with a slate or marble shelf at a specific height, and sometimes a small vent to the outside air. The material properties of slate and marble are simple. Both are dense, both are slow to absorb heat, and a cold shelf in a cool cupboard on a north wall sits comfortably several degrees below the kitchen air temperature for most of the year. You put your butter on it, your cheese, your milk jug, your leftover cooked meat. Not refrigeration, preservation. And for the things that needed it, it was adequate for a climate like Britain's for 9 or 10 months of the year. When fitted kitchens came in and pantry cupboards were ripped out, they were often replaced with MDF shelved wall units that offer the same volume of storage and none of the function. You can't cool cheese in a chipboard box. The material doesn't do it. So the food that used to sit in the pantry moved into the fridge, and the fridge got bigger, and the electricity bill went up, and nobody connected the dots. What I find interesting, and a little melancholy if I'm being honest, is that original slate shelves from demolished pantries are now being sold through architectural salvage yards for anywhere from £30 to £150, depending on size and quality. Someone bought a house, ripped out the pantry, sold the shelf, and now someone else is buying that shelf to put it back into their kitchen renovation. The material knowledge that made it valuable in the first place is being rediscovered through the salvage trade, which is a peculiar way to learn something your great-grandmother already knew. The back bedroom washstand alcove. This one is small, and it might seem minor compared to larders and chimney breasts, but it illustrates something important about how pre-war builders thought about space versus how we think about it now. In Victorian and Edwardian houses, and in a lot of interwar semis, the back bedroom, usually the smaller one, had a small recess built into the wall. Sometimes it was in a chimney breast return, sometimes it was purpose-built. It was sized specifically to hold a washstand, the marble-topped unit with the basin and jug that served as the bedroom's morning routine station before bathrooms were standard in every house. The recess gave the washstand a position. It kept it out of the main floor area. It gave the room a logic, a place where washing happened, a place where sleeping happened, and enough floor space between them to get dressed without performing gymnastics. When indoor plumbing became universal and washstands became unnecessary, the sensible response would have been to find a new use for the alcove, and many people did. Bookshelves, a small wardrobe, a desk alcove. But in the post-war modernization push, a lot of these recesses were filled in to create flush walls, because the fashion was for flush walls, for rooms that looked clean and uninterrupted, and the result was a bedroom with slightly less usable floor area, slightly less usable wall area, and no logical place for anything to go. Here is the irony, and it's a good one. Alcoves in Victorian and Edwardian bedrooms are now mentioned in estate agent listings as features. I've seen particulars that say original alcoves as a selling point, in the same breath as original fireplaces. The things that got ripped out for being old-fashioned are now being sold as desirable, which is right because they are desirable, and they always were. They just looked unfashionable for about 30 years, which was long enough for a generation of builders to remove them. If you have alcoves in your older property, do not fill them in. Build shelves, install a small desk, put a wardrobe in, but keep the recess. You will not get that space back cheaply, and the room will not be improved by its absence. What the modernizers got wrong. Let me try to pull this together, because I think there's a reading error at the center of all of it, and if you understand the reading error, the rest follows. The post-war and 70s modernization of British housing treated surface finish as value. If something looked grimy or old-fashioned, the tile floor of a larder, the cast iron of a register grate, the stone slab in a pantry, the recessed alcove in a back bedroom, it was read as low value, and the thing that replaced it, smooth white units, flat plasterboard, electric appliances, seamless flooring, was read as high value because it looked new, but the grime was on the surface, and the value was in the function underneath. Those features weren't decorative, they were working. The larder was managing temperature, the chimney breast was storing heat, the register grate and the air bricks were circulating air, the scullery was separating uses, the cold slab was preserving food, the alcove was organizing space. Every one of them was part of a passive system. Passive meaning it used no energy, required no bill, and failed only when it was removed. The replacements, the fitted fridge, the storage heater, the damp-proof course, the tumble dryer in the kitchen corner, the marble worktop at £200 a metre, all do the same jobs, or approximately the same jobs, or sometimes worse versions of the same jobs, at ongoing cost. You are paying every month for systems that were installed by a builder in 1908 and ran for free for 60 years before someone got modern. This is not a nostalgic argument. I'm not saying everything old was better, or that we should be washing up in a stone scullery by candlelight. I'm saying that specific features were solving specific problems, and when those features were removed without understanding what they were doing, the problems came back in new forms. Rising damp, food going off faster, kitchens that can't be kept clean, rooms that are cold at 9 in the morning even with the heating on. The features left, the problems stayed. Uncle Derek had a phrase for this. He called it not reading the object. He meant it about tools and hardware. Buying a plane and not understanding what it was made to do, so you sold it for nothing and bought an inferior one later. It applies to houses just as well. People didn't read the object. They saw the grime, not the function, and they sold it for nothing. What you can actually do about it. So let's be practical, because that's what this whole thing is about. If you own an older property, anything pre-war, most interwar, and a fair number of early post-war, there are things worth investigating before you do anything irreversible. I'll go through them in rough order of ease. Start with the air bricks. Go outside and look at low level on the external walls. If there are air bricks, check they're unblocked and unobstructed. If a raised border, a patio, or accumulated soil is sitting above them, that needs addressing. This is a morning's work and costs almost nothing. If the bricks are painted over, clear them. A screwdriver and a wire brush. If they're missing, a builder can install them for a modest sum. This is the single cheapest thing you can do to protect the floor structure of an older house. Next, the fireplace openings. If you've got a boarded-up chimney breast or a sealed fireplace, it's worth knowing what's behind it. A quick tap with your knuckles tells you whether the opening is there or filled. If it's there, there's usually a vent grill that should be letting air through. If it isn't, or if there isn't one, the flue is sealed, and that can contribute to damp in the breast itself. A grill costs a few pounds and can be fitted in the existing plasterwork without opening anything up. If you're renovating, and you have the option to investigate behind chimney breast plasterboard, do it before you replaster. The chance that there's an original register grate sitting in there is real, and even if you don't want to use the fireplace, the grate has value. A good Victorian register grate in sound condition can go for £80 to £250 at auction or through a salvage dealer. Worth 10 minutes with a torch. For larders and pantries, if you're in an Edwardian or interwar terrace and you don't know where the original larder was, look at the ground floor plan from the north-facing side. There is often a section of wall, sometimes now a cupboard, sometimes a blocked opening, that was once ventilated cold storage. A builder who knows older properties can tell you quickly whether reinstating it is viable. The ventilation requirement is simple: a low-level screened opening to outside air, kept free of obstruction. The internal fittings, slate or marble shelf, wooden rack above, are available through salvage for a fraction of what a comparable volume of refrigeration would cost to purchase and run. On that point, let me give you a number, because numbers focus the mind. A standard larder alcove of about 1 meter wide and 60 centimeters deep, reinstated with a slate shelf and proper ventilation, might cost somewhere between £500 and £1,200 in a renovation, depending on your builder and your location. A fridge of equivalent internal volume uses approximately 200 kilowatt-hours per year. At current rates, call it £40 to £60 annually. Over 10 years, that's £400 to £600 in running costs alone, before you consider purchase cost, maintenance, and eventual replacement. The larder costs you once. The fridge costs you continuously. For 9 months of the year in Britain, they do the same job. For washstand alcoves, if you have them, keep them. If you've inherited a room where the alcove has been partially filled in, and you're considering renovation anyway, it is almost always worth reopening it rather than filling it further. The labor cost of reopening a filled alcove and plastering the returned walls is modest. The space you gain is real. Shelves fitted to an alcove are also considerably cheaper than freestanding furniture that does the same job. For scullery-style thinking, you can't build a scullery where there isn't one, but you can apply the principle in how you use your space. If you have a utility room, keep the wet and mucky tasks in it. Don't let it become an extension of the kitchen. Keep a dedicated area for boots, for the dog's things, for wet coats, and keep it physically separate from where food is prepared. This sounds obvious. I'm aware of that. And yet the average modern kitchen I walk into violates it in about 6 different ways simultaneously. Finally, and this applies most to anyone currently house hunting, the presence of original features in an older property is not a problem to be negotiated away from the price. Original register grates, working larder alcoves, air bricks, chimney breasts intact to roof level, original slate or marble shelves, these are assets. They reduce ongoing costs, they solve problems passively, and they are increasingly difficult and expensive to replicate once removed. If you see them in a property, treat them as reasons to offer, not reasons to hesitate. British homes built before 1945 were designed around passive systems that used the building's mass, its orientation, and its layout to do work that we now pay electricity bills to replicate. We didn't upgrade them. We swapped a system that ran for free for one that sends you a bill. And then we wondered why the houses felt colder in winter, why the food went off faster, why the floors were damp, why the kitchen was always grubby. The features worth bringing back aren't the decorative ones. They're the ones that were doing a job before we decided the job wasn't worth noticing. Before you replaster, before you rip out, look at what that feature is actually doing. Because more often than not, it's doing something. And once you understand what it's doing, you might find it's doing it rather well. Which of these have you still got in your house, and do you know if it still works? I'd genuinely like to know. Drop it in the comments, because I'm curious where these things are still turning up, and in what condition. These conversations are worth having, because this kind of knowledge doesn't sit in books. It sits in the houses themselves, if you know what you're looking at. Next time, I'm looking at cast iron objects that are quietly coming back into value. Not because they're pretty, which some of them are, but because people are starting to cook the way their grandparents did. We'll start with the ranges.